And most of all, I want to introduce three artists I really admire: is Mary Heilmann, Billy Sullivan, and David Diao. So they're gonna tell most of the story today, but I did want to talk a little bit about how we all ended up here today. So my name is Ethan Swan. I manage a project here at the new museum called the Bowery Artist Tribute, which really, the Bowery Artist Tribute was initiated in 2007 when this building opened. And the easiest way for me to tell the story, even though they're not a part of the story, is my parents were involved in the Catholic worker movement in the 70s, well, just throughout. But in the 70s, they came to New York to do some work to try to meet Dorothy Day, but to do some work at the Catholic Worker House, which is on First. And they, when I told them I was going to start working at a museum on the Bowery, they said, why on earth would there be a museum on the Bowery? And they were really, couldn't envision anything but the kind of, the neglect and decay and squalor that I think, there's Bugs Bunny cartoons, there's countless books and movies that kind of show this, the way the Bowery exists in a popular imagination. But when we were thinking about this location and the Bowery, there was a lot of thought of this kind of under-the-radar artist community or group of artists that had lived and worked on the Bowery. And so, initially it's next door, there's 231A Bowery, or across the street there was 222 Bowery, which, John Giorno, Mark Rothko, Linda Benglis, a host of other artists have lived and worked in that building. And then we thought down the street, there's the 5 Spot, which is where Ornette Coleman played his first New York shows, or CBGB's, which you could call the birthplace of American punk. So it seemed like there was a story that really could be brought to light to think about a different history of the Bowery besides this one of kind of homelessness and alcoholism. And so we started to do some research. In 1966, the New York Times published an article that estimated there were 150 painters living on the Bowery. So that was kind of our initial goal, was to find, if we could find the names of 150 painters, we would have done something, or artists. At this point, we have about 500 names of artists that have lived and worked on the Bowery. And so this project exists as it's like an ongoing archive. There's a website. On the 5th floor of the museum, there's a permanent installation that has kind of a timeline, clips from some of the interviews we've done. There's a series of publications. We're currently about to publish volume 4 of this series of publications, but most of all, it's interviews. Because, again, this is not a story that exists in art history, and so we've really tried to find a way to pluck out this history, and the best way to do that is to speak to people who lived it. And so all 3 of these artists have participated in interviews for the Bowery Artist Tribute. Excerpts of Mary and Billy's interviews exist in volume 2. All of that is also available online. David is in the forthcoming volume 4. But anyway,
when's it coming out?
Well, the idea was, May is Lower East Side History Month. So there's just a couple last little signatures to get on volume 4, and then it will go to press, I think maybe June. Sorry to disappoint. So anyway, a lot of what we're gonna talk about today is stuff that, stories that started to be told through these interviews that I just thought would be great if we could get the 3 of these people talking together about some of these stories. And we'll do maybe a Q&A afterwards, but if anybody needs to interrupt at any point, I'm happy to engage that as well. So maybe let's just start with David. And just if you could set the stage a little bit and talk about being an artist in the early 70s in New York, and if there was, were you showing in galleries? Do you have an expectation of finding a gallery that would represent you? I mean, what were the kind of the stakes or the possibilities at that time?
Boy, that's a lot of different things. I don't think I had any expectations. I mean, basically, I came to New York because it was the metropolis. And my family is from here. I came back here from college in the Midwest, dying to get back, and basically took jobs like waitering, working, hanging shows in museums and galleries, galleries. And I think it's being employed in the peripheries of the art world, in galleries and museums, that somehow set my sights. I didn't have any to begin with. But there I was working at a major gallery, Sam Coote's gallery, that showed Picasso, and the young artist was Ray Parker. I realized what I was attempting to do in my studio was not any less ambitious than some of these artists who were considered professional and, first rank. So that, I think, gave me a kind of focus. And, well, one meets artists and people of like minds as you go through life, and very quickly I realized my walk-up tenement apartment on 25th Street was not adequate, and went out looking for big spaces, which were readily available in those days. Basically, I don't know if it's true of other artists, but you come up against a block in your work, and you say, oh, I'll just move my studio because, that'll give me a new place to work, and maybe I'll get some new ideas. And, well, I may as well mention it right away, is the guy Jack Klein.
Sure.
I mean, he was the guy who made it possible for many of us. He was some guy from the Bronx who managed to get an inside track with the Lyons House people. The Lyons houses were basically single occupancy hotels running up and down the Bowery. And very early on, Jack was the person that they went to help rent these places. And nobody would rent them because of, as you say, the reputation of the Bowery, except artists looking for cheap spaces. Well, I'll stop there. Let other people have a chance. Sorry.
Well, Billy, you were in a Jack Klein, a Lyons House building, and you were the
Yeah.
first artist in that loft, correct?
No, I wasn't.
you were
Bryce Martin was getting rid of it.
Right, smart. Okay, so
And so, I was going through a divorce, and Helen was campaigning for me to get the law school because I had 2 kids, so that was 40 years ago. And so then I had to go meet Jack. And you had to go over to Canal Street, and he had the big cigar, and he was behind the big desk, and he was a little guy, but he was from the Bronx, you know it. And he said, that he wanted $450 for the loft. And I said, yeah. I didn't know where I was going to get it, but I said yes. And he said, aren't you going to talk to me to get the price down? And I didn't know that he wanted a bargain,
Right.
but I blew it. I blew that. And I'm still in that loft. But I was on the Bowery before that. I was at 250, which is now across the street, sort of across the street. And it was the Paragon building then. And I was sleeping in the front of there. And, around 12 o'clock, I was waking up in the afternoon, and I looked out the window, and it was red, and I thought the building was on fire, but they had painted the front of the building. And that was before I moved to 105, and I've been in 105 since then. And the Lyons just sold the building 2 years ago. And so we're in all this stuff about maintaining them, but we have rights and so the stuff, so as long as I can climb 5 flights of stairs, I can stay in this loft. And it's a great loft. And I was talking to Ethan before, the first job we were talking about, I was at the School of Visual Arts, and Malcolm Morley was one of my teachers, and so when I got out of school, my last year, I was sort of working for him. I mean, was supposed to make the grids for his paintings, and I couldn't quite make the grids for his paintings, but he still kept me there, and he would tell these great stories about, you know, where you hide money under the ice tray, stuff like that. And my wife at that time was working for Roy Lichtenstein across the street. And the thing to do was to go, and then the man about town was Chuck Heilmann. You mentioned
Chuck was my
Heilmann.
downstairs neighbor next door.
Yeah, and so, you know,
Is.
all the ladies
Still
would
there.
go there to buy art because he was like the hottest man. And also Chuck Heilmann was her art teacher at this school called Woodmere Academy in Long Island.
Oh, I didn't know that
Yeah.
part of his life.
I mean, the world was very small. And you used to have to go to the bank to get money or to Mickey Ruskin. If you didn't wake up in time, you'd have to go to Mickey to get money.
Mickey Ruskin is the owner of Max's Kansas City.
Yeah. Which was another place that fed you.
For free.
Yeah, you had to go with 4 wings. It was like that. It was a very easy world. I mean,
Didn't seem that way when we were living through it.
oh, come on. I didn't think about anything. I mean, I would just, and then we would all meet at night in different places. If you went to Max's, the front room was serious artists, and I was in the back room because I was never quite serious. And that was where Andy was, and there was a lot of fun back there.
Mary, you have a story about Max's that I think might also be helpful for us to think about what it was, because all three of you are painters, you're all painting in the 1970s, and you said you were talking to Robert Smithson about, because you were studying with Hockney at the time, is that correct?
Yeah. Well, first of all, about the Bowery, I was living, when I first got here, on West Broadway, and then we heard about this building that opened up that was going to be for rent in Chatham Square, which is after the Bowery, then it changes its name. And so I came over, we got the whole building for $500, and a whole bunch of people moved in there. And yeah, that was the thing. We all went to Max's, and I came to New York right after graduate school at Berkeley, and I was doing like sculpture, which I thought was really edgy. You know, like, we hated the painters. We thought they were so lame. And David came to teach at Berkeley, and we had a meeting of all the graduate students, and they said, only painters can take David's Hockney seminar. And so how many people in this room are painters? All the crabby sculptors raised their hand. And none of the painters liked David Hockney because it was like a real conservative, they didn't like pop art. It was a real conservative painting department. And so that was cool. And he was brilliant. He was like the first postmodern guy, keep making these pictures of paintings in frames and stuff. And he was fabulous. The main thing, one of the biggest thing he taught us was about, and this we're talking 1965, so San Francisco was already starting to happen, actually. And we got to ask him questions about what's going on when you're gay. And, okay, that's a whole nother story. So then I go to Max's, and I come to New York, I think I'm really gonna be happening because like Primary Structures was happening, and Bruce Nauman was actually right out of school. He was in school with me.
He was my teacher.
At SVA?
Yeah.
Wow, he was brilliant, and
Yeah.
really brilliant, really young, and calm and confident. And yeah, he was my hero. So I was making these things leaning against the wall. I hated Linda Benglis because of that, but whatever. So I go to, and I think I'm really going to be a big deal in New York because I'm so cool. Not happening. Like they did this big show at the Whitney of that kind of art, that kind of conceptual sculpture. I'm forgetting the name of it, and I wasn't in it. And I would go, not in the back, not in the back room. I would be sitting with Smithson, talking to him, and I was a huge fan of him, and I wanted him to like me. Wasn't happening, and so then I have a few drinks, and I'm trying to be cute and provocative, and I say, "Oh, I studied with David Hockney," and then Smithson got really mad. He said, "I can't believe we're even talking about the guy," and that was kind of dumb too, but whatever.
We call the front room the Butch Idiots, by the way.
Oh, cool.
I guess I must have been one of them.
You were. But there was this whole, because they were, and they were like,
Not too butch.
Andy, they never went for Andy Warhol or anything. This was
No.
like no good. This was
No, no,
bullshit.
no.
It was silk screens.
though.
Yeah.
One would go to Max's, and the whole trip is you go to the back, to the very end, you make that walk to the back to take a look at the Warhol room.
Yeah.
And then you come back, and the macho painters would stand at the bar and have beer in hand, and some of the rest of us would prefer to sit down
Yeah.
on the in the booths off to the side. And in terms of Smithson, I have to say, you know, he was definitely very anti-painting. He would say to me, "David, you're a smart guy. Why are you still painting?"
Yeah.
But then, in the next breath, he would want to trade an art with me.
Far out.
And
Wow.
the biggest mistake I made is he
Duh.
wanted this one painting, and he wanted to give me some of his slate pieces with the arcs carved
Wow.
in. And I said, "You want a 7x5 painting, and you're giving me a piece of slate?" You know, I didn't understand. You know.
Duh.
Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah, I liked a lot of painting too. Just for like theoretical reasons, but for theoretical reasons, it was much hipper to say painting was dead and it was done and everything. But we were, so then I switched my practice over. It was kind of on the wall already, flat on the wall. When it stopped leaning on the wall, I hung it on the wall. And then I would say, then I started to say at Max's, in the interest of having a beef, I'm a painter.
well, I saw your first show on Cherry Street,
Cool.
the big book piece.
Yeah.
With they're out.
The
The
Book of
book is
Night.
made out of cotton dog,
Yeah.
and it's of a certain size, and each page was different with
They had holes in it.
events on it.
It's like a children's book where the image is
flip.
through a hole. Yeah, it wasn't so bad, you know. I was trying to be original, and also ornery and contentious. So finally, it worked out. It took 50 years.
Don't stop being honorary.
Right, I'm not anymore. No, I'm nice.
No.
Well, just in this this story of painting, and particularly painting in the Bowery, which is, if the Bowery exists art historically, it exists in this story of the abstract expressionists who come to the Bowery in the 50s and 60s because they needed open space, which you mentioned, David, and they needed the light. And so there's these windows, because of course in 1955 the elevated train gets pulled down, and all the windows that had been boarded up are opened, and you know somebody like a lot of like those first painters that came to the Bowery, they talk about walking along, you know, in 1956 and seeing these newly unboarded windows and seeing the buildings that go all the way back. So are there things, I know, Mary, you have a particular relationship with the windows, which is not that relationship. You spoke more about just watching movement out the window and how
Outside the
that.
window, right.
But were there things that you saw, any of you on the Bowery, that or in your loft that helped you? Like David, you've talked about working on the floor instead of on the wall.
Well, that's something I borrowed from Pollock, I suppose, you know.
Sure.
And at some point I gave it up because I realized I had taken it too easily from Pollock. And, next door, the amazing thing about the windows is it looks straight across Prince Street to Soho.
Oh,
There's a long shot, and that was always something that impressed me. And even at the level of metaphor, if the city of art is there in Soho, here I was aiming for it up on the 6th floor.
Well, maybe, could you guys actually talk about that a little bit? Because I think that one of the things when you dig around, a lot of painters or artists at that time, when they were on the Bowery, they might not identify with the Bowery. They might kind of, tend into Soho. Was there a status or a reduced status of being on the Bowery as opposed to being in Soho?
You mumbled it. That was, when you were in another, when you were with artists, it was fine, but you didn't, I never wanted to say I was in the Bowery. When my kids came, they had to deal with bums and stuff. And I used to park my car over, there was a parking lot on where the Bowery Hotel is, above the gas station. And it was never, it was like you lived on the Bowery. You didn't think about it. It wasn't like what the Bowery is now. It's like prime real estate, prime life. But then it wasn't. But I spent a lot of time looking out my window too. I made work about looking out my window as well. Sure. There were cute guys fixing a street with no shirts on. I made a painting. And then there was also, you could see what was the World Trade Center from my loft. Because, again, I was on the top floor, the 5th, I'm still there, 5th floor. But I remember one day, I didn't realize that the Bowery had changed, and then one day I walked down Prince Street, and it was all glamorous, and all these shops, and all these places to eat. And, somehow I would leave my loft, get in a cab, and go to Klaus's house on 8th Street, or we'd go out to dinner or be with other people. Or the other thing, we'd go visit Mike Goldberg at, 220.
No, I actually enjoyed the Bowery and, made it a badge of honor in some ways. The only thing I think of when it was a bit problematic is when my parents came to visit. And then I had to make excuses.
Yeah.
But with other artists, what's there not to be happy about?
No, it's normal.
Close to 6,000 square feet, skylight.
Could you get a collector to do a studio visit or a
No
gallerist?
problem.
Oh, they
Collectors will
loved it.
go anywhere.
They love
Oh,
it.
they love it, exactly.
One time, Lawrence Alloway, who I taught with, said that they had to wear a safari suit to come to my loft.
Mary, the other people in your building, there was just Tina Gerard, who was doing performance at
Performance,
the time?
and she made wall pieces, collage wall pieces, and she's genius. Yeah, they did sculpture, dance, and then there's Dickie Landry, the saxophone guy, and made amazing photographs through that whole thing. And then Phil Glass started rehearsing there.
Right.
And so that was amazing. And then people, and this is in Chatham Square, right in the middle, and there's a big, like a roundabout there. There's a bunch of streets come in there. And then there'd be all kind of music going on in there, and people from the street would come in to hear it, mainly Chinese kids.
Right. And was there, so Dickie and Tina are doing pretty different art than you are. Do you feel like there were ways in which you could influence each other or exchange ideas?
That's interesting. I was really, really judgmental and ambitious and competitive. And so I guess I knew they were good. I don't know. I was kind of so guarded socially, unless I was drunk. And then I was like, well, probably getting in fights then. But I wasn't willing to, I didn't have like the love of a sense of community that I have now. Sure. We had a great scene going on there. And my loft was like a half floor on the top, so it was like a penthouse we had our garden. That's how the weed plants were growing up there. And I hid out up there a lot, I wasn't a big part of that scene. and I wish I could just lie and say I was, but it was interesting. I was a loner.
But
And
when we got together, it was at night, like when you'd go to Mickey's or 1U or the local. It was, you know, it was like, after 9.
hanging, yeah.
Yeah, for dinner or whatever.
Well, we
And
slept
that's
till
what-
noon.
Yeah,
We slept late, and actually
I
I
had
would,
to drive a cab. Though.
you did,
I did it at night, so
I
you could go out.
sometimes would walk home from Max's. Oh, that was because
Usually.
of Blow. Feeling like, you know, going for a walk. Oh, I know another cool thing about Chatham Square is there was like working boys and girls working the street too. So there would be a lot of interesting,
They were hooking on Chatham Square?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
yeah, oh, yeah.
All
Mr.
along,
Dow.
all along Delancey, by Delancey and the
that.
Bowery,
Yeah,
were a lot of
Oh,
streetwalkers.
missed that too.
Archwalker lived around the corner, down on East Broadway.
Well, did you, Billy, I guess, could you talk a little bit, you mentioned painting people you saw out the window, but a lot of the paintings you were making, I would say particularly in the 70s, were of friends, right? Were
Yeah.
of, and was that, did you think of that as other artists? Did you think of that as other people you would see when you would go out at night, or where did that?
They were just, yeah, they were just my friends. I mean, you know, like Rene Ricard kind of got a group of us together to a degree. And there was this onslaught from Bennington, my other friend Stephen Mueller. And then he had these 3 girls, and they all shaved their heads, and they all came back to town, and it was like,
Linda.
Linda's here, and Linda and Robin Brew, and Delia Doherty showed up, and she was designing clothes. Dia was starting, and so then she was designing clothes for Dear. It was an exciting time. I mean, I didn't know it was exciting. It was just what was going on, and my thing was always to take pictures and make paintings and drawings out of my friends. And so, I mean, I didn't even know that Pat Place was the big star in a band when I was seeing her. I was just copying drugs and taking pictures, you know. But that's sort of the way I fell into life, basically. I just showed up.
Right.
And,
So you feel like the community was maybe defined by showing up, not by what you did or how you.
well, I needed a place to make my work. You know, I started showing at Twombly, and I went to the School of Visual Arts, and I wanted to make art, and then you know, you make friends with the people that you hang out with, and luckily, and I focused on the art world, and then then it was time to go to different clubs too. But you'd always go to Max's, then you'd go to the other clubs, and then it was during the disco thing, Max's kind of dwindled a little, and then we moved to 1U. I mean, so things would go back and forth, sure. And I liked, the nightlife was important to me for a long time. I thought I was really fucked up because I thought all my credibility had to be what club I can get into and how I could walk through the scene and what I could get for free. I wasn't concentrating on a career. My ambition was all screwed up.
I don't think people thought about community. It's just something that was natural to the habitus that we all had. But I could say that there were certain centers of activity that people gravitated to. I mean, I'm reminded, here's Klaus Curtis. There would be a group of artists that he showed that had a kind of community. And there were others of us who showed at Paula Cooper. We also had a kind of friendship, or something extra friendship than just hanging out at Max's. Though at the same time, the competition never stopped.
No.
Even within foci of Bikert or Paula Cooper or where have you.
It was huge. That was the style.
That was very much
Yeah.
like, you don't speak about it, but it certainly colored everything.
Well, you'd get in big beefs too, though,
Well,
fights. You didn't, huh?
I didn't.
Okay.
But, I'm not Richard Serra.
Yeah, right, in Chamberlain.
And
Helen Martin, yeah.
Neil Williams.
Yo, there we go.
I remember, yeah.
The war's
These
on.
people have scars to show for it.
I
I mean, they
remember,
have
yeah, in
wonderful,
LA
like,
too.
from fights.
Yeah. And the back room would do the same thing. There would be crazy, crazy things going on.
I liked that about it, that I liked the fighting.
And then we had music upstairs at Max's too.
Yeah.
Remember the dolls, all that
The
stuff
New
was
York
going on
Dolls. I went to see
upstairs.
went upstairs and was Smithson to see
The
them.
the ones from San Francisco, what they call it?
The Coquette.
Coquettes,
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah, try to bring one of those home. You get glitter in your bed for 3 weeks.
Tell us more.
About as far as I can go with that one and try to explain.
That's cool. I've heard that from other guys, you know.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So that there is, so to go back to the beginning, or maybe even before we open the door, Billy, you were, or no, David, you were talking about what you just $200 a month, right?
Well,
for
it
your-
wasn't, no. The first loft I had on Canal Street
Sure.
it went from Canal to Howard Street. The rent was $250. Then the landlord needed, on paper, somebody to run the elevator. So I got $25 deduction from there. And then it was such a big place, I rented part of it to like major galleries such as Fishback and Poindexter to store paintings at. And they would pay me $150. So
Cool.
my rent was $75 for 147 feet by 22 feet with 14-foot ceilings and a 30-foot long skylight. And beyond that, I was able to hang whatever work that they're storing with me. So I lived with Franz Klein's The Cardinal. The one time Bryce Martin came to visit me, he came in, he whisked past my paintings, went directly in front of the Franz Klein, and his jaw was open. He just couldn't believe that I had this painting
Oh, that's
in
so
my living space.
Yeah.
That's wild.
So anyhow, yeah, I mean, there are lots of stories like
Yeah,
this.
Sure.
That's great.
Mary, you have spoken about also because the cheap rent, I mean, over and over again, I've asked this question to, I don't know, 60 artists at this point in my life, is what brought people there. But there's, Mary, you talked about kind of there being an additional lawlessness to that. And I think, you know, it was illegal living where you were. It was not legal.
Well, let me think. I don't know.
Yeah, it's fine. But you guys also.
No, we had to hide our beds.
Sure.
No, it was really illegal.
Yeah. No, I've heard stories of like the bed under the pedestal that then you put the sculpture on top of the pedestal. Or there's Tom Doyle has a great story actually of he got raided and they said, well, you have a kitchen. And he said, I'm a sculptor, I need to heat up water so that I can wash my hands. And they said, well, you have a bed. And he said, well, you know. And they go, oh, you artists have all the fun. But Mary, you also, you know, in the picture, there's I'll come back around, there's the marijuana,
garden. Yeah.
garden, right? And so did you, I think a lot of artists will talk about that on the Bowery, was that, you know, there was just this sense of neglect. You know, people talk about welding on the sidewalk because who's going to stop you if there's a shooting gallery around the corner or whatever it is. But this kind of lawless living, it's important to you, or it allowed you to do something.
Right. It didn't even occur to me to worry about that, or any of us in Chatham Square. It was really like a hippie commune. There were 6 floors, and then we had different people on all the floors. All the people that came from Louisiana would move in there, the Cajuns. And then I had a roof garden, which had vegetables, and also it had the marijuana plants. And it's crazy, no, that wasn't a problem, except I had a ring that I had gotten from my mother that was like on a windowsill or something in that half-floor loft, my penthouse. And somebody reached in and stole it. So, I called the police. And then we had to hurry down and carry these big, massive pots of weed downstairs and hide them. I mean, it's crazy. And my neighbor was John Duff. He was in that neighborhood, too, and so he helped me with that. And then another thing about cultivating the marijuana crop, Dickie Landry was from a farm in Louisiana, and he knew how you would go and you would shake them to make them pollinate each other, and that's why they got so huge and tall and sort of way stronger than most weed was in those days. So, and it wasn't actually a business. We didn't sell it. We just smoked it all.
Nice.
And
John
we were-
Duff is in my old first loft building on Canal Street now. He
Oh.
moved from Dwyer's.
Oh, that's right. They lived there. They own that.
They own that.
Yeah.
Do you feel surprised that, or is it natural that all the people, the people that, John Duff, who was your neighbor in 1970, you still know where he is? I mean, I know that it's hard for me, as a 39-year-old person, to imagine how small the art world was.
Yeah.
And I think, this idea that you could probably go to every opening, you probably knew, when you would go to an event, you would knew the people there. And I think despite the kind of growth that's happened, you still feel like that those people that you saw every night at Max's are still, if they're around, they're around.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was really like family-ish, the community, so that even if you had a beef with people, you still were like really close to them. You looked across the room and were happy to see that you could go over and say some cute, rude thing to Smithson or Frosty Myers or something.
And remember the morning phone calls? Well, what happened?
Yeah, you will.
With the joint watching Lucy at 9 a.m. trying to find out who to call.
Right, I used to watch those TV programs.
No. Where'd you leave the car?
But,
And then-
you
Who are
could,
you?
in,
Oh, yeah.
in Soho, when you walk there at night, it was mostly dark.
It was
Yeah.
dark.
So was
But every window that was lit up, you yourself would know whose loft it is.
Yeah.
Oh, there's so-and-so. He's up. I mean, like that.
right.
Paula Cooper had the first gallery in Soho.
Not true.
Oh, okay. Who?
Richard Feigen as a warehouse gallery
Oh,
Right.
okay.
at
On
141 Green Street.
I worked there.
Okay, I didn't know that.
For
Me
Michael
too.
Finlay.
Me too.
Well, that brings up an interesting point, because there's also the Soho story. I forget which artist said, but he would be out walking his dog. If he saw somebody at night, he would wave, even though 2 blocks away he might not know who it was, because he's sure he would know who the person was. Whereas the Bowery, there was a community. There were people in the
Existing
Bowery. There was an
community.
existing community. There were, at any given time, there could be as many as 10,000 people sleeping on the street or in the SROs. Did that affect your sense? I mean, I know I've heard a lot of artists say, "Oh, here's Mary with the marijuana plants."
Look at the jungle.
Isn't that cool?
Amazing.
It was so cool, and it was such a scene. You can imagine,
Great legs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're still good.
That's the one part that laughs.
But how did the presence of the homelessness or the whatever, the people hanging out, did
It's
it affect?
distressing
It's
to,
distressing.
to know that you have the privilege that these people don't have. I mean, you put blinders on for the most part, otherwise you don't get through it.
There was a lady bum that was there for years and years on the Houston and Bowery. It's the same lady, always there, Panhandle.
And you say hello to her, probably?
Yeah, eventually. you
We
saw
had a
her.
guy that lived right on our doorstep. What, Klaus?
There's a homeless woman. I've lived in the loft for 20 or 30 years by now, even though I know I look much younger.
Oh, he was on the Bowery.
Yeah.
She would lie there, she'd be wrapped up with whatever, like pieces of sleeping bag, whatever she could get. And she would smoke one cigarette after the other.
Whoa.
It was cheap to smoke then, you know.
Yeah, you couldn't afford it now.
Forget it now.
Oh, they still afford it.
Yeah.
Schizophrenic.
She's still there now.
Wow. That's right. Like the guy on the doorstep was kind of a happy dude.
Yeah, but Tom.
There was Jake the poor boy on Spring Street with his shoe shine machine, shoe shine box.
I
But
think
it
of
was a
that.
kind of live and let live situation. I mean, you
Yeah.
know, it's not gentrified. It's not just rich people with their baby carriages. It's
She had,
the whole
someone in her family had expensive taste, 'cause when she first arrived at the park, she'd be pushing a cart, and there'd be an Hermes box all of a sudden visible. Oh, Jesus. And a piece of the dress would fall out 3 hours later, and she had a way of staring at you, so all you saw was the white of her eyes.
Uh-huh.
Oh, God.
It was, they have needles shooting forth from the mouth.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, it's got its sort of crazy humor side. On the other hand, it seems really sick to me that they haven't figured out how to maneuver her into a public space. She turned them down. At the time, she was right across from the law. She turned them down and resisted them 2 times I saw them. There's no reason for that to be.
It's weird, yeah.
Yeah.
There was a guy in Tribeca that forever, but he has disappeared now. In fancy Tribeca.
And then
One last guy.
the other thing is, like, if you went to the bank, you used to have to go to the bank before 3, remember? 2:30. You could see Katie Nolan online. You'd run into people, you know, Mike Goldberg,
Trying to get the check in before the bank
or
closed.
get something out.
Yeah.
Get some cash.
It was before.
There was no cash machine.
There's no such thing as
Billy,
cash.
what bank are we saying?
The one on, right, which is now the Capitol, which was
Up on the Bowery, okay.
the Bowery.
The
Grand.
big
Grand.
palace.
Yeah, it was a
Bowery
beautiful bank.
Savings. Bowery
It was a
Savings
city
Bank.
bank. Well, before, what was it called before city? But-
forget.
But it's where I opened
We-
my
yeah.
first account.
We did have a little drug business going on where I would get, from another situation, wait a minute, is this actionable still?
No, you're.
No.
I'd get all the
It's
cash
okay.
from the guy. I would provide, what was I guess I was providing weed. Oh, no, I'd provide the cash, right. Then he'd buy the dope, and then he'd sell it, and it was weed, no, blow. And then I'd get all the cash and take it and put it in the bank, yeah, and then so to keep track of the money.
Yeah, you had to see tellers.
Well, so I maybe just have one more question, which is kind of an expansion on that question, and maybe refers back to some of the stuff you've spoken about, Mary, where it's, you've also said you tried to evade paying taxes, or just in general, this, I guess, sorry, I didn't mean to say it like that,
that's
but
true. Well, of course,
but
you
there
don't
wa-
pay taxes when you get the money all hiding in the closet.
Right. Absolutely.
Cowboy boot.
In the under the, what did you say, under the ice?
Under the ice tray.
Right. But is there,
A lot of cash in the business.
a lot of cash. So in terms of the kind of relationship to the homelessness and the time, maybe toward the larger world, if you could talk about, I mean, when you said, even when you would have these spats, there was kind of a sense of everybody's on the same team.
Yeah.
Was there kind of, it's a dumb term, but the straight world, was there like a sense of an opposition to that existed on a bigger scale that kind of linked all of you together? or artists in general at that time?
Well, we were beginning to get some attention and some respect from the collectors and the galleries. So that made us kind of change our attitude a little bit, I think. I remember when the 80s happened, when in fact, yeah, I'm thinking a lot about that. When the picture theory people came in, and the guys from LA, Sally and Ross Bleckner and everybody, and Julian Schnabel, and they had a different sense of their image. And Mary Boone opened, and everything started happening in a different way. And that got my attention. You know, I thought, uh-oh, I better figure something out here or I'm going to be done. And so I did. I remember one time a lot of, a few guys from Scandinavia came, big collector guys. Switzerland, Bishopberger was one, I think. Anyway, it was that kind of people. And they came in and they had mink coats. They were men. They had these big minks and they were hanging them on the coat rack in my funky loft. And I said, hey, I'm going to go out and take those out in the street and sell them. And they looked at me. They didn't laugh. And they didn't take an interest in my work either.
You should have spilled paint on them,
Yeah, right.
like David Hammond's.
Yeah. No, and I think that got my attention. I think I figured out that, and you know, I came out of the beatnik culture, where the style was to be against the establishment, not in a loving way like the hippies, in a much more fighty type of way. So I think that did get my attention. So thank you guys. Yeah. So do you guys want to ask us anything?
Yeah, I guess if there are any questions from the audience. Oh, yeah, let me bring you the microphone so that everybody.
We can talk loud enough.
I feel like we want maybe the machine to hear it. It's okay.
So what is it like to watch this neighborhood change so drastically? Like, you guys lived here before it, and now, like, this museum isn't the only thing that's changed, but like, so many people that are really wealthy live here. It's like really expensive, and they're like juice shops everywhere. Like, what is that like?
Well, where can kids live now? They can't even live in Brooklyn.
I don't know. My parents still pay for my rent. Like, I'm in school still.
It's a different world. I mean, every city is the same. You go to Paris, Parisians don't live there. You go to London, they don't live there anymore. I don't know, it's this international class, and you don't notice it when it happened, because it takes a while for it all to just materialize. And then one day you wake up and you just notice that this isn't where you are. I mean, you're grateful that there's a Whole Foods there now. I mean, you like that.
Oh, shopping used to be a bitch.
Oh,
Food shopping.
oh, that's why we went to Mickey.
Doing your laundry was a
No
bitch.
food.
You know?
Do you still love the neighborhood in the same way that you used to?
It's New York. How could you not? I mean, I took the tunnel today, but coming back into town, it's, you get a charge when you see this city, no matter
Yeah.
what. And there's still a life that goes on here. And then I went to listen to somebody talk in right over by the Williamsburg Bridge, and that looked like what the West Village used to look like, all these cute little bistros and stuff. What's going on? I mean, it's a whole other game.
But it's really cool that what I became an artist to be poor and famous. And you could afford to be, you didn't have to really have much of a job to get
We
by.
were taught that's the way it was. And
Yeah.
then everybody came in and changed that.
And then we had to change.
Well, some of us did. Some of us quite didn't do it.
Yes,
Like me.
Some of us would like to change it.
You know,
right. It was weird. But, what I think is cool is that art can actually, now the world sees that it has some value. That isn't necessarily really a negative thing. Like my brother, who always made a big living by his own work in financial business, really didn't like what I was doing, and I wasn't making. My mom was, helping me out, and there was a painting that I gave him, and I wanted to borrow it for a show. The show was me and Blinky Palermo, and they put Johnny and Linda, my brother and his wife, put a kind of funky frame on it, and it looked so Palermo-ish that I wanted to borrow it for this show. And then we sent him over the paperwork, for the insurance and everything, and he called me, he says, I saw how much it's worth. I don't think we can lend that. And now he's really nice to me. So that's kind of interesting. I think we have some kind of power that could help the world.
And the other thing I wanted to mention is now all these people are telling me they're living in Sunset Park. That's where I came from.
Wow.
I mean, it's like the last place in the world I would think anyone would want to
Yeah.
go. It's like where you come from.
Yeah, it's beautiful there.
Well, it's Sunset Park. I learned how to swim in that pool. I mean,
Amazing.
Yeah. But now it's very hip.
Yeah, we just have to figure out,
I mean,
how
you
to
wanted to get over the bridge and out of Brooklyn, and now people are very happy to be in
Go
Brooklyn.
back.
No, they're
Yeah.
going off to Queens,
Yeah. Well, food's good
and
there.
even there.
So that's a good thing, about art. I mean, it takes a stretch to really do the philosophy, but
Well, you can invest in real estate, just find out where the artists are going, and then you
For
can
sure.
make a lot of money.
it's too
You
late,
know,
though.
Mary, you're actually
yeah.
talking about a very small percentage of artists.
Having
Most artists,
success,
most
right.
artists do not make a living from their art.
Right.
And,
Right, not actually, but sort of philosophically, you could see that making beautiful stuff at every level of culture, not just really, really expensive visual stuff. Anyway, this is what I've been thinking about lately. I know it's a long stretch, but. Yeah, you're right.
Hi, hello. I've wanted to ask you, I've spoken with a lot of people for some research that I'm doing who have lived in the Lower East Side kind of in the late 70s, early 80s. And they talk a lot about how the fine art world or the visual art world wasn't so separate from dance, theater, music as it is now. And I was wondering if that was your lived experience on the Bowery too, that you were hanging out more with poets and musicians, and there was a little bit more overlap in dialogue, and how that manifested. I know things like going out at night and going to the discos and Max's and stuff, but if there were other ways, if you found poets in your studio, for example, sometimes, and how that kind of played out.
Well, Rene Ricard was a poet and an artist. I mean, and there was St. Mark's Church, and then there was Tricia Brown and the Judson people. It all got to, and Tricia Brown's before me. You can probably talk about that better. But when I hooked up with Klaus Curtis, it was like Tricia Brown was the center of that, and then there's all the people about that. And Klaus actually was part of starting Chatham Records, which is like from where you live.
Right,
That's
Chatham
where
Square.
where I got, and
Well, the poets always complained.
that we made
They
the
always
money.
said, oh, you painters have it easy. You have a product to sell. Not that we did, but the potentiality of it was there. And you don't sell poetry, and I guess that still obtains.
Something to think about.
But we needed them to write the reviews.
Well, at a certain point, the belles-lettres kind of writer was the only one around. All those theoretical ones were still in the wings.
Yeah.
By the way, it was cool to see Joan Jonas in the front page of Saturday's Time. Not Sundays. I was mad it wasn't Sundays, but
Me too.
yeah. Because she always purposely stayed under the radar. And
Who was that?
Joan Jonas.
Oh, there's that radiant photograph of her in the Times.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fabulous.
It's about this big.
Yeah,
She's got the biggest smile on her face.
it's a great piece.
It's
Uh,
so
Roberta
great.
did it, yeah.
It's a beautiful piece.
You want to get us out of here?
No, did you have a comment?
Say that again?
A question?
Oh.
theoretically, though, I think there's hope. That's my
So
point.
what you guys are saying, that dance doesn't mix with art anymore, like, and poetry? I'm asking the younger people, Klaus.
Actually, it's coming back.
Yeah.
I think there's more kind of an attempt to, have the arts intermingle.
There's definitely a moment where, especially with dance in the museum, is a really big thing right now, and certainly among my friends, I see a lot of writers picking up that heritage, poets who are making their way by writing reviews. So there is definitely some of that still, but just in general, in terms of, I guess part of it is maybe the culture of education is one thing, and then also how people organize themselves or find themselves hanging out. That I've heard a lot of people talk about how it feels more separate than it used to be. And I don't know, so maybe it's more a shade of gray as opposed to all or nothing. Because definitely in my experience, there's a lot of exchange. But I think maybe even with that exchange, it's still a little bit more, because there's just so many of us, right? There's like 7,000 painters, 7,000 curators, 7,000 poets, and it's a lot of us.
Yeah, I think, one of the other things, and I was thinking about this earlier, is like Charles Simmons, he spoke a lot about how he felt like his circle of friends was the audience. And he mentioned, Tina Gerard, and he would say Tina would do a performance at the Loft for 10 of us. And there was no sense that there was going to be somebody beyond that audience, that there would be a stranger that would show up, that the audience was the group of friends, or was the community. And so I think in that way, there's also a way in which audiences have expanded, not just the people producing work, but people encountering it. And so in that way, you can kind of see how things branch off or fragment in a way or become specialized.
So the really wealthy that keep putting their money back in their pocket again. Sam Wagstaff was my upstairs neighbor on Bond Street where I lived. And Sam was always taking trips and spending money to support the trips. He traded Alan Sarah, I think, something like 20 sheets of really good drawing paper in exchange for a small piece of sculpture. So no one does things like that anymore.
Yeah, artists are smarter now.
Well, Mickey always gave you a tab you could eat for free. You just
Yes,
sign
a
your
tab
name.
without end.
No
Once
end.
once
No end.
you're on the payroll, so to speak, you can just charge whatever. And it was a great source for us poor artists, because friends would come in from out of town, and you could actually take them to dinner.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you could go in this cool place and people would know you, and it was great. Something about the theater and the mix of dance and theater and poetry and art. I think that, they're trying to bump up the opera and all kind of classical performance and make more people come.
Well, it's thrilling seeing an opera on the stage because it's so elaborate. It can be beautiful, may not equal the intensity of
And
normal repertoire.
I think they are. I think it is growing to where it is mixing up practices. Like theater is so popular and makes so much money, does so much business, and a lot of it's really good too. So that's kind of hopeful, and I think they're trying to figure out how to make certain days and stuff where you can go for less than $50 a ticket.
Well, we used to have La Mama. That was like our mainstay.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to do sets there.
Yeah.
And the Theater of the Ridiculous.
And I think that's kind of a model for the theater, the Broadway type of theater.
Well, it's so much, well, if it's good theater, then it'll be there, or it will be on Lafayette Street at the Public Theater. And once it moves
And then
uptown,
move over.
then it moves up,
Yeah,
and then
Uptown.
I don't know. I'm kind of idealistic, but
well, I am too,
there's hope.
There's hope.
always. And we're looking.
Need more, Alina?
Can I?
Yeah, of course.
I feel bad. That was a nice note to end on. Can I? Yeah. Okay. I was wondering, before identity politics kicked in the 80s and the 90s, what was it like? And I guess I'm looking specifically for things like, was there a sense of humor about this stuff? Were people fighting about this stuff? But like actually in the bars and the clubs and the lofts, like how were people dealing with things like gender and race? Was it coming up? Were you antagonized with each other? Was it, not necessarily from a professionalized place, but like, when you were actually having fights about who gets to show and stuff, was that one of the things that came out? And if so, was it funny or was it really rife with tension? Or what were the kind of politics around it? Miriam, of course, thinking of you. But everybody too, please.
One cute thing for like me was like when feminism happened, I didn't like it because I wanted to just hang out with the guys. I didn't want any other women to get in there with me. And that's all like just a theoretical idea. Well, that was sort of true too. And I figured it out, but no, it was a big issue. And in fact, it's so cool at the Whitney, they have this massive Lee Krasner painting up. And she was so brilliant, and that she really, took the back seat with her boy. And that's not the case so much anymore.
I've noticed that we used to use terms like tranny, and now you can't use terms like tranny. I mean, they were your best friends. Yeah. And it's like, kids are, you can't use that language anymore. I mean, it changed, and I was unaware of the changing of the language and the freedom. And, you couldn't be a gay, you always hide the fact if you were a gay artist that you were gay. I mean, until
now
this.
People fake it and they say they're gay.
Well, it's
not.
Well, I don't.
Really?
I don't know who would do that, but.
I just said that.
No,
But I mean, talking about
I think
gender
we're all
changing.
products of society and ideology. So
Yeah.
usually, unless you're a militant, you sort of enter this stage and take on the values that exist without much criticality. I myself have always needed somebody else to kind of, clue me in.
Yeah,
That's how I learn.
yeah.
And the fact of the incipient feminist movement coming to the fore was an enormous source of education for me.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, given my own stupidity and passivity, I'm just going along, Somebody else had to tell me that I was being discriminated against as an Asian artist, It didn't occur to me initially that I was being discriminated against. But then once that became an issue, I learned and I borrowed from it. And the same is true of feminism.
Yeah, that's cool. And gayness.
And gayness, sorry. Yeah.
We got one of everything.
No, I mean, let's remember, Rauschenberg and Johns were not upfront
Oh,
about
no.
being gay.
Not at all.
Oh, that's such a cool story. And especially
Well,
Rauschenberg
till
and
today.
Twombly traveling.
Doesn't,
Or Cy, or Cy,
Yeah.
yeah.
doesn't, they're not there.
Traveling with Rauschenberg is not easy.
Oh, tell us.
I did it just once. He had to make a print in Europe or do something in preparation for the show. And he couldn't find anyone, I think, who was egoless enough for him to take the space or ask to take the space. So he left first. By the time I got there, the taxi driver that picked me up at the airport said, he just turned around, he looked at me, and he looked at my reflection in the mirror, and he said, "You're not here to see that crazy artist, are you?
Yeah.
He's trying to buy the whole fucking island up. You won't be able to eat anything or do anything." I said, "He's one of the kindest, gentlest people I've ever met. Loves to give things away that are valuable completely." So that was, could be very difficult. He could be deeply perverse, but he was not a mean fellow.
I want to thank everybody for coming. David, Billy, Mary, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate the sharing. Thanks.
Thank you for organizing this evening.
Easy.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks.
Oh, it's fun.